anyone who are subscribed to our newsletter, which PS you should definitely go do, because we just share a little bit about ourselves, but also remind you when an episode is out. A few weeks ago's newsletter, I said that I binged watched Ride or Die with Tavia Spencer and Hannah Waddingham. Like, generally when you watch a trailer of a movie, you are actually just disappointed to watch the movie because the best part was actually the trailer. But this one, oh my goodness gracious, if you look at the trailer, you think like it's one sort of story. And then you watch it and you're just like, what? I was just like, you know what? Acting was phenomenal. Set design was good, music, all those things. But the writing, it was just fantastic. So definitely 100% recommend that.
It makes me think about those times when you read a book blurb and you think it's going to be one thing and then you get into it and it's like, I was wrong. Like, I can see why the blurb was that way, but I was also really wrong in my assumptions of what was about to happen. And it's a pleasurable experience to me because it breaks the norm, the tropes, and the things that you thought were going to happen don't happen the way you thought. And so it's exciting and it's new and it's fresh.
100%.
So today I actually made myself a berry tea.
I like it. It is only Tuesday, but it feels like 7 Fridays from now. And so I have a coffee, to get me through the day. Are we ready for this episode?
We are ready.
Alrighty. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, welcome to Tea and Tales. We are so happy to have you here with us. I'm Madeleine Einal.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We especially would like to thank Tara Rama and Thijs Boschman for joining us each week and tuning in. This week, we're talking about reclaiming your voice through storytelling with author Amy W. Vogel.
Hello, Amy, and welcome to Tea and Tales. We are very happy to have you here with us. Not only are you an author, but you are also a women's book coach and a former pastor. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your writing journey, and how you came upon being a book coach.
Well, it is a long and winding road. The book coach piece is only about 4 years in. I've been a published author since 2018, but expanding out to helping other women tell their stories and publish their books is more relatively recent. And it turns out it is a really good combination of everything that I was doing before, including being in pastoral ministry, because you do a lot of coaching, you do a lot of mindset work, you do a lot of organization, and, people come to you for answers. When I stepped into self-publishing, I think it's just part of my personality. People started coming and asking me questions and how did you do that? And can you help me? And because I wanted to be a student of the industry I was involved in, I was able to offer a lot of wisdom. I've made a ton of mistakes, hate for people to make the kind of really expensive mistakes I've made. And, just want to help other women accelerate their definition of success. That piece of it has been really fun to evolve as I've continued to write my own books and as I've continued to press into my own stories. I'm always learning. And so I really take that approach and love to help other people with that, whether it's obviously through my own books or with their own goals.
I love that phrase that you said, that you were a student of the industry, because I feel like no matter what industry that you're in or what you're trying to do, you have to be a student of that industry to learn what you're doing, make all those mistakes. One of your focuses is helping people to find their voice, because not only when you're talking about writing do you have to find your writer voice, but to be able to find your voice to tell your story is hard for a lot of people, especially women who have gone through difficult times. So what role has storytelling played in your journey in finding and rediscovering your voice?
I didn't realize until I was about 35 that I was just a natural born storyteller. I spent over a decade in sales. My success came from the relationships I had with my clients. The thing that always stuck out to me and that I always remembered is the stories they told me. Their personal stories about their family, their work environments. I didn't know it, but I was selling in a way that's called relational sales, but that's because you're connecting over a shared human experience. Well, that's what storytelling is. You are enabling people to enter a world that they can then take with them. and process. And so for me, when I discovered that, oh yeah, I'm telling stories all the time. It naturally lent itself to the work I was doing in my job. And then, when you are in ministry and when you're preaching or talking on stage every week, people don't want to hear just people go up and, blah, word vomit on stage. They want to be carried through. They want there to be a point. They want their minds to be opened up. And the thing that I like to do in any talk I give, in any story I tell, long form or short form, is it's based on a question. And so we don't necessarily arrive to a particular answer, but that question stays with you and you discover your own answer. So for me, storytelling is not point A to point B. Storytelling is, again, this long and winding road, that's my story. And so most people don't arrive to the point of their lives where they are in a linear fashion. Enabling other women to see the beauty in that journey, the highs, the lows, the power of it. That's what is so exciting to me. And that's where I feel like we as women make the most impact. That's how we teach the best. I have 3 daughters, and when I was teaching them about stranger danger, I told them about my own story of stranger danger, and they've not forgotten it. And they will years later ask me questions. Mama, how did you know not to get in that car with that guy who was telling you he knew your mom and she was sick? And I was like, I listened to myself. I think I was 9 or 10 walking home from school. And so using stories as a way to not just tell one particular outcome, but let it expand for the hearer, then they become participants in the story themselves and can apply it to their own life.
So we all know, whether you do indie publishing, whether you do traditional publishing, what people want in books is voice. That's said so many times, 100 times over. And sometimes you just you're like, I don't understand what this means. When you talk about reclaiming your voice, what does that mean to you on a personal and creative level?
For me, I had to find my own voice before I could help anybody else. And I'm in my early 50s. It took me till I was in my early 40s to discover what my voice was. And I think for women, we arrive at that gradually because we've got to unlearn so much about what is programmed and indoctrinated in us. Lucky is the woman who come out in her late teens and early 20s and know who she is and know what she's here to do and what she's saying. It is a very, very rare woman. Malala Yousafzai is probably one of those. But even that, as she's gotten older, the purpose is the same, but that evolves, that expression, that voice changes as you change. And so I know a lot of women in my generation, in my age demographic, who are just now discovering their voice. It was something that they thought they knew. It was something that they had experienced early on in life, but they lost it. And so when I say reclaim, I'm specifically talking to my ideal reader. It doesn't mean that my books aren't enjoyable by all people, but you writing for a particular person. And so that person usually is some part of a reflection of yourself. When you're reclaiming your voice, you have that person, that avatar, if you will, in mind. And you have to do the work to dig down and discover not just what you want to say, but really, how do you want to say it? I am in the process of editing a fertility coach's book, and she lives in Canada. And she and I've known each other for almost a year now. And so I know her well enough to know when she starts to go off on a tangent, she's losing her voice. She's losing the point of what she is trying to say, but her voice is strong enough that it's easy to bring her back to it. When you talk about voice, it is truly an expression of who you are showing up as. So for instance, in some of my books, I show up as mother. In other parts of my books, I show up as the spiritual side of myself. And I say me, books take on their own personality as you write them, but there's a soul to it, and the writer puts part of themselves into it. With this latest release for me that's coming up in September in Bejeweled, I really had to dig down and find my sovereignty, because you can't write a queen if you are not self-sovereign. And so that was a really difficult journey for me. I wrote a whole first draft of 154,000 words that is now just a really big reference manual for the book I actually wrote, because I had to discover this voice. I had to let this queen, Jezebel, that I was writing about, I had to let her discover herself through me. Voice is one of those things where it's more of an art than a science, and it takes practice, but it also takes the freedom of creativity to just let it flow. So you have to have the balance of the discipline of writing, whatever you're writing, short form, long form. Really good social media content creators know their voice, they know their brand, they know why they're here. They just do it really well in snippets. Songwriters, Taylor Swift is a great example, and we've seen her evolution. You understand who they are when you encounter their work. But it takes a long time to get there. It takes a lot of practice, and having that balance of giving yourself permission to freely speak and also the permission to evolve is really important, as well as the discipline of practice. Nobody knows their voice when they first start writing their first book. They don't. They really don't. Because it's going to change. It's not the same for everybody, but there is that kind of eureka moment where you lock in, as the kids say. You lock into what you truly are trying to do through this particular project, and then you move on from there. That's why I always tell my clients, they're like, this is going to be my one and only book. And I'm like, yeah, right. Just come back to me when that book 2 comes around.
I love how you brought out all the other things too. Songwriters, poem writers, long form, short form, that your voice can take a lot of different avenues to come out. And I feel like a lot of people think if you're not writing a memoir, then it's not your voice. It's not you. And yet I tell people my stories are bits of me. Every single character has something in that is me and is my voice. And it's just me portraying it in another perspective. And sometimes I'm arguing with myself. Who doesn't argue with yourself?
Right.
I know when I first started, it's a very vulnerable thing to put your voice out there and to dig deep, like you said. I took a course on emotion, and she kept saying, dig deeper into the emotion. I'm like, I'm scared of the emotion. I'm unsure what I want to do and how to do that. How can people break past that and take the first step toward their expression?
Yeah. That's usually, I've said this before. In fact, one of my first offers as a coach was helping writers get unstuck, because it's usually not a big shift, but there is some part of you that is resisting this. If you go beneath the surface, right? If you go deeper, the surface thing will be some kind of form of fear of failure, imposter syndrome. My experience is it's not that. It's really not. The transitional moment is you're actually afraid of being successful. What happens if you do tell the story and the story does help somebody? It's at risk, and risk is inherently scary, but that's where courage comes in. And I actually learned this in the book, 10x is greater than 2x, or 10x is better than 2x. I can never remember that title. He said, everybody wants the confidence. And that's what voice is. Voice is confidence. You know what you want to say. You know how you want to say it. You're practiced enough to move forward, but you don't get to confidence without courage. And so if you dig a little deeper into the motivation of your characters, into the motivation of what you're trying to say and why you're trying to say it, most of the time I find with women, we're afraid of our own authority. We're afraid of, if we're going to show up as fully ourselves, people are going to judge us for it. Or people are going to, one of the things that held me back for so long was I had several family members call me a hypocrite. And that's a really old wound. And so when somebody says that word, I really have to step back and go, am I? It's that practice of stepping back and looking at yourself. And instead of believing the evidence that, knocks around in your brain all the time, especially at 2 a.m. that says, oh, well, look, you haven't done this. You've never done anything like this before. You failed in other ways, or you've been successful. Just keep doing that. What's comfortable, trying something new, taking that risk, digging deeper. You just got to. If this is something you are passionate enough about, and I'm an Aries, so like this is who I am, but and I've got friends who are not, and they're like, I just can't do it like you do. Well, why not? I'm the quintessential, just do it. But that's also why I'm a good coach, because I let people feel their feelings, and also there's such a thing as accountability. You told me you wanted to do this. You're paying me. Let's do it. So I think the critical piece is that courage is doing it scared. Courage is going ahead and doing it, because the risks that seem so huge in your mind, really when it gets out there, it never turns out like you think it is. Fear is a liar. So it never turns out to be this, the outcome that you think it's going to be. It's going to be something that comes from left field. Other than, I've never done this before. I'm afraid to do it. I'm afraid to be vulnerable. What will my family say? That is the number one objection I get. If I write this, what will my family say? And my question is, what will they say? Do you know? And if they say something at the end of this whole process that you've been through, this whole transformative journey of writing a book, because whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, look, you're going to have to heal and you're going to have to grow up. You get to the end of it. Are you really going to let other people, whether they're blood relatives or not, determine the course of your life? For me, that's a big question. That's a hard question to answer. But if you want to be successful in publishing, you are going to have to face fears. You are going to have to face yourself and decide what's worth it and whose praise is the most worth it to you. So that's why it's still like a 2% finish rate on every manuscript started, because we do let things get in the way. We do let other people's words for us get in the way. We let our own selves get in the way. And so back to your question about voice and reclaiming your voice. It's reclaiming who you are, not what everybody else says, and what you want to do, what kind of impact you want to make, the kind of legacy you want to leave. And if that's important enough, you're just going to say, F it, let's go.
Oh my goodness, it's like you've just spoken to my soul right now. First of all, when you said fear is a liar, immediately the song of Zach Williams popped into my head. Such a good song. But then also, oh my goodness, I feel Sarah should have like a quote book right next to her, because what you said about like, you're not afraid of like failing, you're afraid of success. I was like, pardon? I was like, excuse you. Okay, just mind blown over there. That was so good.
It's true in my own life that I'm afraid of what the magnitude of the impact I could be because of all of the things. I'm a recovering people pleaser. So all of the things other people could say about me. Yes, it's going to bring haters. I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where I got slammed on Threads for doing an unpopular opinion. To me, it was probably light, but I'm very sensitive. I talk a big game, but I'm just like a super squishy person on the inside. And so for people to say things that feel mean to me, that feel very personal, it was like, y'all, it's the internet. But that's the thing that we have to grow through. In the end, I was like, am I going to let a bunch of strangers determine how I view myself? And that's fear, right? That goes back to fear. Or am I going to keep pressing forward because I know what I have to say is important and I've just begun?
I love this saying. I always tell people, everyone can sing. Everyone just doesn't sing beautifully. So to me, I'm like, do you believe everybody has a story worth telling? And if they do, how do you, as a book coach, help people believe that about themselves?
Well, it's not my job to convince you to believe it. That's something you have to do on your own. When I've been asked this question before, I think everybody interprets it like you have this big, like a Malala story, right? No, I don't have that big of a story. I don't, but I have stories that can help other people. So maybe I don't have a life that is one big story that will help somebody overcome their trauma or that gets me on the Oprah show, right? I don't even know what her show is called anymore, but let me date myself. The Oprah Winfrey Show. I think that everyone has a story that can make an impact. And it is important to me to challenge my clients because I coach people who write long form. So the one question is, yes, everybody has a story or stories. The second part of that to me is how you tell it. Some people are better at short form. Some people are better at video. Some people are better at blogs. Some people are better at YouTube. Some people are better at children's books. You name it. The world is your oyster at this point. That's another way to discover your voice is you try different methods and figure out which one really connects with your creative spark. In publishing, there are also like the whole industry has changed so much in the last 10 years. Not just the rise of self-publishing of KDP, but also the rise of the novella. The short story is back, and the short story published on its own and as a book is back. I've got one up here. I got another book covering it up. But that is something that you get to discover, you get to incorporate. So, figuring out the medium in which you tell your story is important as well. And then the third piece of that question is, how do I help my clients? Again, I can't convince you whether or not your story is worth telling. And I've had people that have explored my services and not gone forward because they can't get over that hump that their story is important enough. And they let things like, I don't have the money. Well, if it's important to you enough and you value what I'm trying to do enough, you'll find the money. I don't have the time. Again, time is a commodity. You make that time. There are seasons of my life that I've gotten up at 4:00 in the morning to write because I'm freshest in the morning. I can't do it at 10:00 at night. I know my rhythm. And so I've had to get through edits because I've had a deadline, and I've had to remind myself every morning, I don't have to do this forever. And I got through it. It is up to you to believe in yourself enough or to do the work enough. What I do as a coach is to support you in that journey. But I can tell you all the things. I can share my own story. I can share the things that work for me, but it's up to you to believe that. Not on a holistic grand scale, you're going to be a New York Times bestseller, but what you're doing right now, the words you are writing right now are important enough for you to keep going and see what happens.
Being a speaker, I totally see that in new people who come in and try out their wings in the speaking, and they get maybe one or two speeches and then they just bloop. I'm done. I've decided I can't do this. You've talked about quite a few roadblocks, telling yourself you don't have the time, you don't have the money, my story's not important enough. I feel like a lot of times people will say those because they're easier excuses, they're easier fears or blocks that they hope somebody would be like, yeah, I understand time is hard, and then just let them back off. What are some of the more common fears and blocks that are usually the core? Usually the issue that they really need to figure out and overcome so that those other surface things become a non-issue, and I now have that dedication to move forward.
I talked initially, about the fear of success. The fear of success disguised as the fear of failure. That's a big one, because if you are afraid to be successful, anything and everything will get in your way. And also, when you start moving forward on something you believe in, something you find is powerful, the resistance is always going to rise to meet you. You start elevating yourself in a way, doing things for you. It's the same thing on a health journey. If you start wanting to get in shape, injury comes up, soreness comes up. There is always something. So here's the elevation, here's the resistance. It's going to rise to meet it, because the question is then, how bad do you want it? The common expression of some of those fears are, I don't want it bad enough, really is what it comes down to. Other fears are fears of what other people are going to say. Fears I'm not talented enough to do this. Look, none of us are talented enough when we start out. If you read one of my most favorite books as far as writing craft, it's called Writing, Creativity, and Soul by Sue Monk Kidd. And she talks about her own writing journey. That lady was writing in anonymity, publishing just short story articles for like 10, 15 years before she wrote, I think it was The Secret Life of Bees, which ended up becoming a huge book. And then her subsequent books. I mean, none of us are good at the start. None of us. It takes practice. That's why we start out as little babies and grow slowly. That's the mindset you have to look at it. And so that fear of not being good enough, that fear of not being smart enough, that fear of not being pretty enough, that fear of being on camera on social media, the fears that come up are based on worthiness and how worthy we feel within ourselves and how worthy we think our goals are. Look, there's always going to be family members that say things. I was told I needed to get a job, that there is no way that what I was doing was going to be successful. Not by one person very close to me, by two. Two of the closest people in my circle were very concerned that I would be destitute. And spoiler alert, not at all. My company has grown year over year because what I feel like I'm doing is important enough. The stories I'm telling, the stories I'm helping others to tell, it's important enough and it's relevant enough. This is a real world example. Sometimes you start writing something. Sometimes you start with a story that you're like, is this going to land? And as you write it, the world kind of shapes to mold around it. And that happens too after you publish something. That's happened to every single one of my books where I've released it and I'm like, I don't know if it's going to find its place. space. Not everything lands as an instantaneous success. It takes time. It takes work to find the ideal readers. You have to do that work. And so that's another thing is fear of doing the work, the lack of discipline. I always say it is a balance. In other scenarios, we talk about work-life balance, but there is a creative discipline balance in becoming successful because you can't be on all the time and doing, grinding yourself into dust. You have to take breaks. You have to let the cup refill. I think fears are common. We all have them. It just comes back to not how legitimate those fears are, because fears always have evidence, always, especially if you want to do something risky and new. But how much space do you give them? Not just in a day, but over the course of a season of your life. How much do you let them drive the bus? And if they are driving the bus, you're going to get all the reasons in the world not to move forward. And so it's just a matter of how important is it for you to keep going.
I love how you talked about, people who are close to you that kind of questioned whether you should do something like that. Because I have two thoughts about that. On the one hand, I'm like, it's good to have people close to you who are concerned about your well-being and financial being and all those things. But on the other hand, you also kind of need people to be like, okay, I did, quotation marks, warn you about your choices, but I'm also here to support you if something does happen. But it's kind of the same with writing, because number one rule, okay, there are a lot of number one rules, but this number one rule is don't let friends or family ever read your book and give comments to you. Like, they're the worst beta readers ever, because they will just be like, oh, this is nice and flowery and blah, blah, blah. Where that is actually where you need the people to be like, excuse you, what did you do here? Because this is not working at all. There's always that balance, as you were talking about so many different things. I don't know about the two of you, but I'm a very spiteful writer. When things happen in life, when someone tells me I can't do something, then, naturally we'll have a scene in my book or a character in my book.
There's a reason why a husband dies in every single one of my books. Usually the first husband. Every time he might be dead at the beginning of the book or he dies later on, but that was actually something I discovered writing this book 6. And now into book 7, I'm like, oh yeah, the first husband dies. No offense, ex-husband.
It's like a little Easter egg you have in all your books, keep it going. Can't not do it anymore.
Right? I'm down with the spiteful writing.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but on the other hand, also spiteful writing is such fun. But then I think a lot of us write to heal, which is such a powerful thing as well. So how can writing or storytelling be used as a tool for healing and personal transformation?
I'll use this most recent example of the book I was editing before. And she talked about a technique that she uses in her coaching practice called sense making. It's a well-known psychological technique, but it boils down to when something lives in your head, you don't know how crazy it is. You don't know, because it is just part of the forest for the trees, right? It's part of the waters you're swimming in. It's part of sometimes the background noise, sometimes it gets louder than that. So when you say something out loud, or in our case, when you're writing something to process something, it removes it from here and all of the associated consequences of it only living in your brain and gets it out. It is a catharsis. It is a way to process what has happened to you. It's so interesting how something goes from so intimately personal when it's up here or in here. It's a lived experience that's happened to you in your body and you're recovering from trauma from it. And you put it on paper and all of a sudden, instead of it being like right here, there's just a little bit of distance and you can look at it. That's why writing is always suggested. Journaling, it is always suggested as part of therapeutic healing, is because it becomes less your identity if it goes somewhere into the air on the paper, even more effective when you physically write it out versus when you type it. If you get it to a point where it's coherent enough, it doesn't mean that it's the best book or in the world, but if it's coherent enough to share with someone else, that it's got some structure to it. It's a story. It's not just a brain dump or a stream of consciousness. It's a structured story. And you have the courage to read that to somebody, a little more space. I tell my clients this all the time. Every draft becomes less and less about you and more about the reader. In my program, we call it a zero draft. I always use the analogy of you're sitting at a pottery wheel and it's that first vase you make. You needed the practice, you needed to do it, but ultimately you're going to smash it down and rebuild something else. That's about you. That's about you learning your craft and your voice and all of the things you need to learn. Zero drafts are for you. They're for you to put the skeleton of the story on paper. But the more drafts you write, the less it should be about you and about what you're going through and how you're processing, the more it should become about the reader. Because ultimately, that's the power of storytelling, is that you are trying to invite somebody in, but then let their imagination take over. The universal human experience allows us all to heal. I firmly believe, even though I'm not in the church anymore and I'm not a practicing Christian or anything like that, I still believe that everything we do is for a purpose. Everything that we've experienced is for a reason to help someone else. I'm a very service-oriented person. And so I don't go through things just for me. I've lived enough life to know that. And so when I share that with someone else, it definitely means that if I get it in the right format, if I have the courage to share it, somebody else is going to be helped by this. Create that space and recognize this can help somebody else. That also takes the sting out of it being about you too, if it can help somebody else.
When I first started writing, a lot of the things were very personal to me. And as I've written more and more and more, I've started to use the writing not just for myself, but somebody else said this or something else is happening here. I'm trying to process, I'm trying to understand. And so now it's snuck into my writing, but it gives that space for me to be able to think it over and process things. And it gives my characters more variety and voice, all the beautiful things. And I feel like when we sometimes want people to understand us, we also need them to understand themselves, to understand our writing. Being able to leave that space for the reader to now put their own version into the story and to learn for themselves is such a beautiful goal. I think that we all need to be able to reach. We've been talking about how important it is to find your voice, all those things. But what about actually doing it? I was wondering if you had any tips, tricks, techniques, maybe exercises that you would recommend to a beginner as they're trying to find their voice. What can they do to practice it and to be able to get into their deep feelings like we've spoken about?
Thank you for lobbing this softball, and hopefully I'll be able to hit it, because I actually just went through this with a client. She is just starting to write a narrative nonfiction about her uncle, who was a World War II war hero, saved a town in France, all this amazing stuff. I'll caveat this with, I have no problems using AI on a business front. Writing, I'm not good at, but I still go back and edit. She was depending too much on AI telling her what her voice was creatively. She was using it as a crutch. So she would put in the ideas and ChatGPT would spit back out the narrative, the story. As a professional editor, I'm like, it's way too easy to identify that. Like I can pick it out and I'm like a sniper with that stuff because it doesn't sound authentic. It's written by a robot. God bless the robots. God bless them. But when we're talking about writing something so intimate, like a book about her family and a well-written story, I read it all, but I had her put that aside. And in one of our very first meetings, I said, just tell me a story, something you remember. And she picked out 2 stories, not about her uncles, just in her life. And she picked out 2 stories, one from when she was in college and one from when her son was at camp. And I said, okay, guess what? You're going to go and you're going to write these stories. You're not going to put any blinders on them. You're not going to put any structure on them. You're just going to literally verbatim as you think it, put it on the page and see what happens, because AI was messing up her voice, right? She couldn't find herself in the voice. 2 exercises, man, she had nailed it. She's just natural talent as a writer, natural talent as a storyteller. And so as I was reading those stories that she wrote that had nothing to do with her book, and sometimes we need that. We need exercises that have nothing to do with the story we're trying to tell, right? It just popped right out. Wasn't perfect, would have still needed editing and all that good stuff and rewrites, and that's what the process is for. Remember, that first vase we're going to smash and we're going to try it again. But if you write about something, a story you don't necessarily think you'll ever tell, and maybe something small, maybe not the big traumatic experience you had when you were 5 years old. Maybe you just talk about your experience going to the grocery store yesterday. Something that is very low risk, but you tell it in a way that is, you observe what's happening. Your viewpoint is from an observation, almost like a camera. If you look at it from the camera, you describe what you see, what you smell, what you hear, the sensory, that's what makes readers feel the story when they can place themselves into it. Because when they can feel it, when they've got that sensory, tactile, their imagination engages and they jump right in. And so maybe start with something very, very small. Maybe, talk about your morning coffee out in the backyard. And the first thing I would say was, my short respite out in the backyard enjoying my steaming cup of coffee with protein powder was interrupted by the small dog's bark. It's a theme here. And the blazing sun as it crested over the trees. I live in Texas. It's hot here right now. So I had a very short window of time to enjoy my coffee outside before it was unbearable. But, even short exercises like that can help get those creative juices flowing. There's a million exercises, but I got this from Sue Monk Kids' book. The 3 questions you want to think about are, what do I want the reader to feel? I'm looking because they're pinned to my wall. What sensory details will trigger that emotion? And what makes it personally relevant? What invites in the universal human experience? What is it about this story that connects? Well, if you drink coffee, and especially if you drink coffee outside, you get what I'm saying. Sometimes it gets hot. Especially if you're in Texas, you're going to just start to sweat internally and externally. It's just going to happen. And so those sensory details will come through and it will draw you in. It is the practice of showing somebody rather than telling somebody. So that it just takes work. Start with something really, really minor and work your way up into the big thing.
That's why I always like a writing prompt, because sometimes when I feel like in a little rut or I'm just like, not vibing with my work in progress right now, then something like a short story will just get that juices flowing again, which is just nice.
There's also the Pomodoro method. You write for 25 minutes, you're done. Along those same lines, you limit your word count. You got to say this in 250 words. You put constraints on it so you're not stuck there for what feels like hours at a time. You've got a timer running kind of thing. That's what I do with my writing is I know I can write about 1,000 words in 45 minutes, give or take. If it's flowing really well, my writing goal is never time-based. It's always word count-based because I know if I hit 1,000 words, I'm deep enough into whatever I'm trying to write in the chapter that I can keep going and probably will finish the chapter or get real close. Then I do other things like I dance, like just get up and shake your booty, like music, read. Oh my gosh, if you're a writer and you're not reading, you've got to grow your craft. That ritual of writing, you sit down, you light a candle, you have a snack, whatever it is, like give yourself the permission to experience that.
And every book can bring out different types of methods.
Absolutely.
Method acting. So what advice would you give to someone who's ready to tell their story, but afraid of being judged or misunderstood?
There is no one size fits all. If you have to go in as deep as doing therapy, do therapy. I think probably the best thing you can do is get a book or get another writer's story about how they overcame their own limitations. And limitations meaning at the beginning and along the way, because we don't just have limitations one time. We have them every single step of the way. Remember, we elevate, resistance rise to meet us. So find a way to get inspired. Find a way to stoke that creative fire in your belly so that you don't have a choice. It just is that important for you to do it. So however that looks like, and for me, reading somebody else's story not only inspires me, but it also makes my creative brain just pop off like fireworks. I just finished a book. I was actually listening to the audiobook, but I have the book that I was so immersed in the story that now I kind of want to write a story like that. This next series that I'm working on, how do I tell it in this long form? It was multiple POV. It was really interesting and refreshing. So maybe read something outside of your typical, genre that you like to, or the kind of typical books. Step out, be courageous in these little bitty small ways, and ultimately it will lead you to, I don't have a choice but to do this.
Thank you so much, Amy, for all of your amazing advice and thoughts. I definitely feel like my brain is starting to go 100 miles an hour. I need to write for the next 2 hours now, I feel like. And I just kept thinking of other writers that I know who need this kind of motivation and people who are out there working and struggling. So I appreciate you taking the time to teach us about finding our voice and keeping that motivation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it is my passion to help other people. And it's like I tell my kids all the time, you can make mistakes. I just don't want you to make the same mistakes I've made.
And if you as the listener would like to hear more from Amy or go and see what she does for her business. Maybe make a little contact there with her. You can find her at www.amywvogel.com and at Amy W. Vogel on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We like to keep things short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here, if you love the topics that we are discussing and the guests that we have on, go follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Details. And you can follow us on YouTube as well and see our lovely little faces. Yay! You can also subscribe to our newsletter, which I already said in the beginning, but it's very important, so go do it. And then go to that purple icon on your device and go to Spotify and like and share and comment and tell us what show you have binge watched. That was really good. You can help us go up. It's a moment.
Then join us next week where we will be talking about what if your publishing house closes. And bringing life to this topic because she has experienced it is author Arini Floatman. Happy writing.
Bye.